Recently, we discussed what Ichigo's possible role in a potential Hell arc could feasibly be, considering how absurdly powerful he is by the end of the series. It seemed like a worthwhile question to ask, and now today, in something of a direct follow-up to that video, I also want to take a look at what a character, or characters who are intimately connected to Ichigo himself, could also find themselves doing in this completely unexplored frontier that is the possible Hell arc, and that's Zangetsu. Zangetsu has always been a fairly small but pivotal part of the Bleach story, specifically of Ichigo's story. Now obviously, Ichigo is always wielding some version of Zangetsu in every single fight he partakes in, but Zangetsu the character, be that the old man or the fusion of Ichigo's Shinigami and Hollow powers white, generally only appears at some crucial juncture of Ichigo's personal development journey. However, as of the start of the Hell arc, which takes place approximately 10 years after the Thousand Year Blood War arc, as far as we know, Ichigo's development has come to an end. He went through an absolutely transformative process during the Quincy Blood War, in which he became a true Shinigami and then effectively surpassed what being a Shinigami means, and came out the other side more powerful than ever, but with seemingly still so much left to learn and master. And yet, with the Hell arc taking place after such a significant time skip, what room is left for Zangetsu in the story? How will Ichigo's relationship with these iconic characters have changed, if at all? And how will the two characters coexist, now they are supposedly in balance? In today's video, which is going to be one of my more rambling, stream of conscious style videos, we're going to dive into Zangetsu's potential role in the future of Bleach, so let's take a look. Before we get started on today's video, guys, consider hitting subscribe down below if you haven't done it already, as it really does help the channel out, and I would greatly appreciate it. And of course, if you hadn't guessed yet, there will be some spoilers for the end of the Thousand Year Blood War arc in the video to come, so be aware of that as well. I was a little surprised by how much of a back seat Zangetsu took in the Thousand Year Blood War arc. In a way, it makes sense, considering everything that happens and the enormous revelations that end up, well, completely shattering Ichigo's entire world, basically. But at the same time, considering those revelations, those same revelations, it's weird that White has nothing to say in the entire arc. He doesn't get a single line. Old Man Zangetsu's moment is very powerful, and obviously sets Ichigo up to achieve his true potential moving forward. But ultimately, considering their place in the narrative, I do think Zangetsu as an entity is handled slightly weirdly in the Thousand Year Blood War arc. Bear in mind that we hadn't actually seen Old Man Zangetsu since the Soul Society arc in the manga, which is in itself totally crazy. Both Old Man Zangetsu and White play a fairly substantial role in that arc, and White in particular helps to then set up Ichigo's journey in the Arrancar arc. Speaking of which, White then suppresses Old Man Zangetsu throughout the Arrancar arc as a result of his growing power and influence in Ichigo's soul, as Ichigo continues to slip further and further into hollowdom. Of course, by the end of the Arrancar arc, Tensor Zangetsu is introduced, and he and White fuse together to essentially take on the truest form of Ichigo's power to date, a perfect combination of everything within his soul, yes, including his Quincy powers too. It's a bit of a shame that Old Man Zangetsu wasn't involved in this sequence at all. I mean, I know he technically was, but the actual image of the Old Man Zangetsu that we knew and loved, of him being involved, would have been nice. However, I also get it at the same time. And of course, it's important to remember that while this form, often just referred to as White Tensor, has Tensor Zangetsu's face, it is all of Ichigo's power speaking to him here, White included. To be honest, I've kind of jumped the gun a bit. It's not so much Zangetsu's reduced role in the Thousand Year Blood War arc that I find strange, though it is weird, and we'll get to that in a bit. But what's even stranger, and maybe precludes him having less of a role in the final arc, is his complete non-appearance in the Lost Agent arc. Zangetsu's sad farewell to Ichigo at the end of the Urankar arc, is a genuinely moving scene in the manga, and one that really stuck with readers, and so you anticipate their eventual reunion as hopefully being something heartfelt and truly earned to look forward to. And yet, some 38 chapters later, also, it is crazy that it's only 38 chapters that Ichigo spends without Shinigami powers, and almost 2 years in-universe, Ichigo regains his lost Shinigami powers, and when he does, Zangetsu in any form is absolutely nowhere to be seen. And sure, I know Ichigo is literally in the midst of fighting Ginjo and Tsukishima, and the battle against Execution is about to break out, but the fact that we don't even get a single word of acknowledgement, or Ichigo, closes his eyes for a brief second and sees an image of old man Zangetsu or something like that smiling because they're back in the game, nothing like that happens, even once the battle is won. And that was always weird to me. That was really weird. Because that means that Ichigo's reunion with Zangetsu happened completely off-screen. And I can't help but think that that kind of maybe signaled a downplaying of the character's importance in actually appearing on screen in Kubo's mind, now that we were, for all intents and purposes, entering the second half of the series, where Ichigo's powers are concerned. But of course, that's total conjecture. And then we get to the Thousand Year Blood War arc, and again, it's maybe a little strange that that reunion is never touched upon. The very first time we see Old Man Zangetsu in the arc, and it's the very first time we've seen him since Ichigo got his powers back, crucially. And remember, this is the first time we've seen Old Man Zangetsu specifically since the Soul Society arc, is when Ichigo is confronting him about maybe the biggest betrayal he's ever experienced. And also compounding things, White is nowhere to be seen, and has nothing to say, despite the fact that Ichigo has finally learned the truth about his power, and is now aware that no, White isn't some malignant entity. He is in fact the source of both his Shinigami and Hollow powers. You could argue that Ichigo already accepted White as a part of himself in Deicide, but now he knows even more. He knows everything he needs to know. He knows everything there is to know. The closest we get of an acknowledgement of White, and again, it's a very good moment, and one that does a great job of showing and not telling, is when Ichigo returns to Oetsu's palace, and White, in the form of an Asauchi in this moment, bows before him, and Ichigo takes his hand. Obviously that's cool. Though the image of the Asauchi bowing before Ichigo doesn't really scream that they're on the same level to me. If anything, it looks like he is being subjugated by Ichigo, or at the very least is considered somehow inferior in this moment, but that's by the by. Again, the actual sequence with Old Man Zangetsu in the Thousand Year Blood War arc is handled very well. It hits really hard, it's impactful, and it genuinely works. To be totally honest, like I said, I am kind of rambling. I'm not really sure where I'm going with this. I just feel Zangetsu and White, I guess, were handled a little weirdly in the back half of the series. Like, they weren't really given their dues, and so I'm wondering if that will translate to the Hell arc in the future. It's interesting because when Ichigo faces Yhwach at the end of the Thousand Year Blood War arc, and he calls upon his hollow powers specifically to awaken the Horn of Salvation, and he does so by flooding his Zanpakutō essentially with Yhwach's Quincy power, he talks about his power in a way he never really has done before. It's clear he's already gaining a better understanding of them, and he speaks of them, finally existing in a kind of harmonious balance, but we never actually get to see him have any kind of a conversation with them. I guess what I'm getting at is it never feels like we really get a true resolution to the big twist reveal. Everything, of course, works out okay. Ichigo accepts both White and Old Man Zangetsu as his power. They're both Zangetsu in his eyes, which is great development for him, and a very nice and neat way of kind of closing the loop on that. But then we never get to see them existing within this new landscape of acceptance. But eventually, all of this brings me to my next point. By the end of the Thousand-Year Blood War arc, and then by the start of the Hell arc, where is Ichigo at in his personal relationship with Zangetsu? There's a part of me that would absolutely love to see Ichigo and White specifically finally sitting down and having an honest-to-God conversation with each other, where they're not trying to kill each other all the time. And maybe they'll never be like that. Maybe the hollow inside White makes him too volatile to ever truly be trusted, but I'm not convinced by that. He was willing to fuse with Tensa Zangetsu to help Ichigo learn the final Getsuga Tensho, even if it meant disappearing potentially forever. And once Ichigo achieved his true Shikai, and at last understood what the blade is me really meant, we see a great shot of White standing watch over Ichigo. It's a really cool but also quite a sweet moment as well. The anime even adds a nice shot of White with a kind of prideful smirk of acknowledgement on his face. You know, he's proud of Ichigo in that moment. Whereas in the manga, it was just a reused shot from earlier in the story, like a completely different arc. I only wish they had actually spoke to each other even briefly. Like I said, it would be kind of surreal to see White having a somewhat normal conversation with Ichigo, especially an Ichigo who has matured greatly, both in terms of age and in terms of power. That's why I'm curious as to where Ichigo's relationship currently stands with these guys. Have they spoken at all about the fact that Old Man Zangetsu is actually Ichigo's Quincy powers since that big reveal? You know, has White spoken with Ichigo about the fact that they were effectively deceiving him for all that time? Has Ichigo tried to learn anything new from the two of them, especially in the 10 years since the Thousand-Year Blood War arc? Considering when we see Ichigo in the Hell chapter, it's shown that he's now able to condense Zangetsu into a single blade again if he so chooses, which I still maintain is a little more convoluted than really needs to be. It seems likely he's done some more growing since the last time we saw him, and that tracks with what he says to you, Harbak, about still needing time to master, being able to call Zangetsu out whenever he wants. Remember back in the Deicide arc, how it was Ichigo's first time performing the art of Jinzen of his own accord? Well, it would be really cool, now, to get an evolution of that moment to show us just how far he's come in regards to his relationship with his Zanpakutō. Maybe nowadays he's able to just simply shut his eyes and enter his inner world almost immediately. Plus, while it would be cool to see White and Old Man Zangetsu just kind of hanging out, how does Ichigo's inner world actually look these days? Maybe it's been reshaped upon discovering the truth about Zangetsu's identity. After all, the last time we saw Ichigo's inner world, everything was kind of crumbling around him. But now he should be in a much better place than before, having emerged from that scenario with a greater understanding. Frankly, he should be in the best spot he's ever been regarding his powers. You know, I wouldn't expect to see any rain, I wouldn't expect to see any blemishes upon those skyscrapers. They should be rising to the heavens and potentially above, the sun beating down upon them. So, this, admittedly, like I said, kind of rambling discussion, brings me to my main question. What kind of a role could Zangetsu really occupy in the Hell arc, or just moving forward in the future of Bleach? Of course, it really all depends on where Ichigo himself is in regards to his power, which makes sense considering they are one and the same, and why I consider this video a direct follow-up to that last one. But if we do get the chance to see both White and Old Man Zangetsu again, and I hope we do, I'll be interested to see a shift in their power dynamic. With each other, yes, but with Ichigo as well. As the main character, as kind of the point of reference for the reader, Ichigo spends the vast majority, if not the entirety, of the Bleach narrative growing, learning, becoming stronger, and starting to understand not just the power he wields, but the wider world around him as well, that he's still very new to. It's all new to him. Ultimately, he's often on the back foot when it comes to his encounters with Zangetsu. Almost never do they truly feel like equals from the get-go. You know, they might get there eventually, But Ichigo almost always arrives in his inner world with questions, with worries, with concerns, not of his own accord, with a need to learn and to grow and to gain something from them. What if this time there isn't anything like that in the arc at all? What if this time we see an Ichigo who is on the pedestal alongside Zangetsu? An Ichigo with little need or even room to grow, at least not immediately, at least not in the short term. This could be an Ichigo who is more in control of his power than ever before. And so maybe Zangetsu doesn't have much to do but to kind of sit back and observe. Maybe we'll see a future where Ichigo gets to grow his relationship with Zangetsu beyond something that feels very erratic, schizophrenic, like it swings from one extreme to the other on a dime. With Old Man Zangetsu and later Tensa Zangetsu, it only ever really felt as though Zangetsu was a teacher to Ichigo, a mentor, and that Ichigo was his student, and that was the extent of their relationship. And then, where White was concerned, it was a wholly antagonistic relationship, as though White was a genuine villain in the narrative. I'd love to see Ichigo actually going to Zangetsu for help, but as an equal. No longer a child who needs to be taught, no longer someone who needs to overcome hardship. He's done all that and achieved everything he needs to achieve, and now that he's got his power in order, it would be amazing, I think, to see him going to them for advice, for their opinion on the current situation unfolding in the story. Maybe he asks them what they think about Hell, about the new set of villains. Maybe he just wants to keep them clued in on what's going on, get their opinion, get their advice on some plan or something they've got cooking in the arc. Although I guess they wouldn't be able to tell him truly anything he didn't already know. Where things get genuinely interesting for Zangetsu moving forward, though, is if something happens to Ichigo, something unexpected in the new arc. The obvious answer, to the point where it may as well be a meme, is that Ichigo, if he's still the main character of this arc, that is, gets some kind of a new power-up, likely from Hell itself, in accordance with the way he has had power-ups in every arc to date. How would this work in relation to Zangetsu? Would they be affected at all, and if so, how would that change manifest itself? Would we see Ichigo attempting to balance this additional power too? He's come so far to get White and Old Man Zangetsu to play nicely with each other. What would happen if you introduced something else, potentially even more dangerous, into the mix? Honestly, and I'm just spitballing here, but I think if any character is likely to get a Hell-related power-up in the new arc, it is not going to be Ichigo, it's probably going to be Kazui. I'm just throwing ideas out there at this point, but imagine if Ichigo, instead of a typical power-up, instead of some out-of-the-blue familial connection to Hell, Ichigo is somehow, I don't know, corrupted by Hell's presence. He grows stronger, but it quashes his other powers in the meantime, leading to a corrosion overall. Maybe they are incompatible with an Ichigo's soul. That would be kind of interesting, I think, because of course up until now Ichigo is a perfect hybrid of all of the races, and so once the hardship is done, once he's gone through the tumultuous stage, the powers all eventually align. But what if he finds one that doesn't? As a result, we see White perhaps being suffocated by this new entity, however it's depicted. Or perhaps, rather than stifle Ichigo's other existing powers, could this power of Hell somehow twist and warp Ichigo's current power instead? Leading even to perhaps visual changes in both Zangetsu and Ichigo's inner world. I think there's definitely the possibility for some new inner conflicts to be introduced, but the question is, does Ichigo really need that? Or is it simply redundant at this late stage in the story? In my previous video on this subject, I saw a few people playing around with the idea in the comments that if Ichigo truly has become too powerful to really fit into the narrative in a realistic way at this point if left unchecked, maybe this somehow becomes an arc about rescuing Ichigo. And actually, popular or not, I think that could maybe work. I feel like this could be a way to introduce that kind of idea. Ultimately, there's all manner of loopholes that Kubo could access to make Ichigo weak enough to compete fairly, but a genuine corruption of his power could be an interesting route to go down. I think what I would want most, though, to be totally honest, holding my hands up, is to go the kind of boring route, I guess, and just show Ichigo working alongside White and Old Man Zangetsu in a way we've never seen before, while also giving us an insight into the time they spent together over the last 10 years. That's a major issue with a decade-long time skip, specifically where the human characters are concerned. We're suddenly missing potentially a huge chunk of development. There's room to fill that space. The reason I would vouch for the so-called boring route for Zangetsu is simply because I think their development is intrinsically tied to Ichigo's, and to upset the apple cart, so to speak, comes dangerously close to undoing a lot of what Ichigo rightfully earned in the Thousand Year Blood War arc. And so that's why, as you can probably see, any approach to Zangetsu in the future feels like a bit of a balancing act. And that kind of brings me nicely to the final point of the video. What does the future really look like for the character of Zangetsu? I can't help but think that a character like this, who as a manifestation of Ichigo's power, organically ends up having less and less to do over the course of the story, as Ichigo gets closer and closer to completing his own development, is kind of destined to disappear, to dwindle and diminish in importance and influence naturally over the course of the series. Unless it's somehow possible for Zangetsu to be involved in whatever Kazui's story turns out to be, and I don't see how that would work, it does kind of seem like Zangetsu's role in Bleach has mostly come to an end, as the actual personified character. Obviously, Ichigo will continue to use Zangetsu in battle. Unless, like I said earlier, the Hell arc introduces some unexpected and potentially huge changes to Ichigo himself, but whether people would really want that or not is unclear. And what that would mean for Ichigo's development would also be called into question, and then you have to ask, is it really worth it? I guess to kind of circle back to the start of this video, why I have an issue with how Zangetsu is used in the second half of the series, or specifically how little both White and Old Man Zangetsu are used, is because it didn't feel like we had organically reached the stage where their story could be concluded. There was still plenty more to show, I think, from a reunion with Ichigo to helping him get his true power under control. Instead, The Blade is Me kind of reads like a goodbye, when in reality it should be the opening up of their relationship to the best it's ever been. And I guess it is, in a sense, a goodbye to the status quo, but that shouldn't mean the end. And I hope one day we get to actually see that. We get to see them interact, all of them, as true, firm, equal allies at last, whether that's in the Hell arc or otherwise. Alright everyone, but that's it for today's video. Again, apologies for the kind of rambling, uneven nature. I hope you enjoyed it nonetheless, and I hope you took something of value away from it as well. Do please let me know your thoughts down in the comments below regarding Zangetsu and their potential role in the Hell arc. What do you want to see from these characters? How could they possibly work alongside Ichigo's own development? I'd love to get your thoughts and ideas down in the comments below too. What do you think of the way Kubo used both White and Old Man Zangetsu in the second half of the series? White, despite being Ichigo's actual Zanpakutō spirit, has no lines in the entirety of Bleach from the moment Ichigo gets his Shinigami powers back, which just doesn't seem to really make any sense to me, but I'd love to read what you think down in the comments below. Alright everyone, once again, thank you so very much for watching. Consider hitting subscribe if you haven't done already. Check out my other channel, Mr. Tomo Talks Games. And also, maybe consider supporting me over on Patreon as well, as it really does help support the channel in a really substantial way. It does make a huge difference, especially when YouTube can be a little up and down, a little unpredictable. Patreon is there to be the backbone of the channel in many ways, and you, like everyone else listed in the credits, is just making a massive difference, so thank you all so very much. Alright guys, until next time, I'll catch you later, and I'll see you then.